And I'm very excited as our next guest. He does such a wonderful job with Zach Berman on the PHLY Eagles show, Bo Wulf. Bo, good morning.
How we doing? How about that TV magic, the swap out mid ad read?
Well, not
what
only
a
that,
crew here.
Not only that, somehow a cup of coffee appeared. Well, I got a freshener, right? I mean,
I gotta tell you, I'm usually on that side, so I feel like I feel a little uncomfortable. I feel like I'm playing left-handed. This is like,
dude,
I'm going over to right tackle after my whole career at left tackle.
It's true. That's very real. Like switching sides. I don't know. You know, I the same way at home in bed with my wife.
Oh yeah,
right. Like she always has her side, and I got my side.
And when you go to a hotel, you stay on your side.
Same
right?
exact
You
thing.
gotta stay. Absolutely.
Stay on the side. And of course, my Massimo's in the middle. So you know.
Yeah,
that's how it always works.
It's chaos if you start switching sides.
You can't.
It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, Bo, you're right on, man. Stay on your side. That's a lesson.
That's absolutely right. No doubt about it.
I got lots of things I want to discuss with you. And first of all, this is the first time I get to hang with you on the show.
I'm excited.
I mean, this is
Thank
great.
you for having me.
No, thank you. And thank you for your hard work and all you do during the Eagles beat. It's terrific stuff. You and Zach just slay it.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. I think you know, Zach has a lot to deal with.
So, so the big story everybody's talking about today is Micah Parsons. And so I'm pretty close to the situation. I've talked to a lot of people, and I hear that there's nothing remotely close. Like, that's not happening. There's no Micah Parsons trade in the works. They're not getting rid of him.
How could they? He's the best young pass rusher in the NFL, right?
Exactly. Now, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of talk that he's a handful and this and that. And you saw that report out of Dallas.
Sure. Yeah. And it's one of those things where you don't know exactly what to believe. And there's probably like half truths in there.
Yes.
But, this would not be the first time that Jerry Jones has had to deal with a good player who is a bit of a handful off the field. If that is the case, it's hard to imagine they're in a situation.
I love the kid. I know the kid. I don't see any of that. Now, again, I'm not in that locker room, and I don't know.
Well, to them, you would imagine that a kid being an Eagles fan is a huge problem. So maybe that's what they're talking about, right? Like he's a handful because he likes Devontae Smith.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you talk about dream scenarios, and having a guy like Micah would be the ultimate dream. I can get lost in the fantasy. But it's not reality.
Well, and it's always interesting to think back to that draft, that 2021 draft, when the Eagles took Devontae Smith and they traded with the Cowboys to go up 2 spots, and then the Cowboys stay at 12 and get Micah Parsons. And I always think back to like that Penn State staff. How is it that they were not just playing this guy who's the best edge rusher in the NFL on the edge? And if they were, he would have been a top 5 pick, right?
I mean, are you kidding me?
And so, okay, the Eagles aren't going to draft a linebacker, but if they had evaluated him as an edge rusher, you better believe they would have taken him over Devontae Smith.
I think that they would have. If they get Jefferson, now things have changed, right? Because you're not in the same draft spot. But had they gotten the receiver and they had gotten Justin Jefferson, I think they would have looked at him, because I do know that they were looking at him off the edge. Like, NFL people were looking at him off the edge.
Yeah, and I think it was also, there was the question mark because he hadn't played. He sat out the COVID year, right? So there was a little bit of a question. Devontae Smith was not the Eagles' like top goal. They wanted Patrick Surtain.
Yep.
They wanted J.C. Horn. Both of those guys went before. And so it seemed like Devontae was the last guy of that tier. And so Howie trades up 2 picks to get him. I think they were just a little bit unsure about Micah Parsons, whether he was going to be, just an edge rusher.
And you would have wondered, though. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, if you would have had the way
Jefferson and Parsons,
the way it would have fell out. I mean, that's the
beauty
of the
draft. But if you get Jefferson,
draft.
You're probably not picking there,
exactly.
right?
And that's why it's all nonsense. But it's fun. It's always fun to look back, and that's the beauty of our draft. Like, looking at the draft, I think that's why in Philadelphia we're so enamored with the draft. Like, we love being draftniks. That's a big part of it. By the way, it's 9:30 right here on the Anthony Gargano Show, and we're brought to you by TrueMark Financial Credit Union. So, I think the biggest need is obviously a playmaker on defense. Where you at? Like, how do you kind of sizing this thing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Howie Roseman has done a good job papering over the roster enough that they don't need to force a specific position in the first round. And that's where you get in trouble. That's why that's part of the reason they, missed on the Rager pick, because they needed a specific type of wide receiver. They didn't fill that spot in free agency. I think they've done a pretty good job. And so, like, knowing Howie, I think that he wants to probably focus on the positions he normally wants to focus on, and that might be offensive line or
edge,
defensive line, right? Yeah. Exactly. But I do think that corner is a possibility. And, Terry and Arnold, the guy from Alabama, is a guy who checks all the boxes, and I imagine would be someone that they might be willing to trade up for. After that, you're talking about, and everybody loves the story of Cooper DeJean, the Iowa kid. I mean, like, the odds of a white guy from Iowa being a corner on the outside, but he's this crazy athletic guy. I was just watching his basketball highlights out there.
He's a great athlete.
Yeah. I mean, he tested at his pro day yesterday. He, jumped out the gym, all that stuff. I don't know if they would be willing to pull that trigger. I feel a little bit reticent.
A little too. Yeah, I think that's a little too early.
Yeah, I think it's not exactly their profile, right? And not just because he's a white guy, but because he's from a Big Ten school. Doesn't play the same level of competition, and there is some question mark about what position he can play. I mean, I do think that tackle is a realistic possibility, and I know that, like, people don't want to sit around and wait for a guy to make an impact, but that's what Howie does. Like,
listen, and listen, that part of roster construction is important, right? Like, the one thing that this team has been, like, superlative at is offensive line and depth along the offensive line and building that line together. Now, there's some argument, like, do you want to pick a guard in the first round?
Sure.
Because that's kind of what you're looking at.
It's not good value.
Right.
I think if you're going to take the guy, he has to be the eventual Lane Johnson replacement.
Yep.
And maybe he can then play guard this year. I mean, it is true. We talked about it on our show yesterday. We had Fran Duffy on, and we talked about all these tackles and, like, the history of where these guys come from. If you want a Pro Bowl tackle, you got to pick them in the first round. Like, they do not come from outside the first round. And so if you think that Howie wants to...
Isn't it interesting that tackles... Now, I again, when you look at, and I'm not counting guys that were projects, right? Like, you're not looking at guys that, that somehow switched positions. Like, you've seen some
like
of that.
Jason Peters, sure.
Right, like some guys. But, like, to your point, tackles are first rounds and early picks, and guards you find later, and centers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I have and I'll have a story on all PHLY later this week or next week about all the history of, like, the last 10, 12 years, where the Pro Bowlers and All Pros come from. And tackle is second behind quarterback. Like, those guys go early, and there are fewer busts than the quarterback. It is arguably the position that the league drafts the best, whereas guards, like, they're a little bit older. They don't have to be from Power 5 conferences. They come in the second, third, and fourth round. Like, those guys do come later. So, like, if you're going to draft a guy in the first round, he better be the eventual Lane Johnson replacement. Now, you talk to Baldy. Baldy's close to Lane. Lane wants to play 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But, like, can the Eagles count on him staying healthy? They would tell you that when they have bad seasons, it's because the offensive line blows apart. They have injuries there. And you talked about depth. Like, they lost a lot of the depth. Jack Driscoll's gone. Sua Opeta's gone.
Yeah, Driscoll.
They need bodies.
They do
in that room.
They do.
So I do think that's a realistic possibility. But it wouldn't be as exciting as a guy like, Terry and Arnold, who can come in and start right away, and you could play him all over in the secondary.
Yeah, and you look at it, because if you can't get lost in this, I want to try to win now and use the draft. You always got to keep in mind that the draft,
it's big picture.
It's how you sustain it.
Yes.
Right? Like, you sustain greatness and you sustain taking your shot. It's the whole thing about, let me hang around and I can take my shots at a Super Bowl, because every year is different when it comes to injuries. But if you keep your core and keep replenishing your offensive line and your defensive line, and let's talk about the defensive line for a second.
Yeah.
Because we all were loving those drafts with all the Georgia kids. But, Jordan Davis has been an issue, right? Now, I'm sold on Jalen Carter. I think Jalen Carter will be fine.
He's a stud.
All right. But everything else, there's question up and down with those kids.
I totally agree. Now, you start with Nolan Smith. Last year, like, second half of the season, they needed somebody to hit the quarterback in the worst way. They needed somebody to take the snaps away from Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick, who were just getting run into the ground in the worst way. and they still didn't trust Nolan Smith to be on the field. And this is a guy who was a 4-year player at Georgia. I know that he's a
big games.
like
I mean,
a
obviously,
project in terms of like
size,
turning his body.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who should have been ready to play, and they didn't trust him to be ready to play. And so that's a concern to me. Obviously, they're going to expect him to play more this year. Jordan Davis, the early part of the season, he had it, man. And it was like, oh, here it is. Year 2, he has developed a pass rush plan. I thought it was like the first 4 games of the season, the most exciting part about the roster was that Jordan Davis was turning into a pass rusher. And then it fizzled out. It was gone. And so they need to make a real decision about what they're going to do. Do they think that he can be a 3-down player? Because no Fletcher Cox. I thought Fletcher Cox was the best defensive player on the team last year.
Dude, I got to tell you, I mean, it was so impressive how Fletch played. Like, I was... Because I didn't expect much from last year. I thought, wow, this is your... And you talk to any veteran, and they'll tell you, like, the last 2-3 years is the steal contract, where you're just going to kind of set yourself up and grab a big fat paycheck.
I thought that was his best year of the last, like, 4.
Yes.
Like he was really, really good.
Yes.
And so they got to replace him. And, like, I like Milton Williams a lot. I think they will eventually try to extend him, but... That's just 3 guys there.
Well, to me, the key is going to be on Milton Williams and on Sweat because, look, you chose Sweat over Hassan Reddick.
Well, I think it's...
Sweat and Bryce, but, you know.
I think they chose Sweat and what they could get for Reddick over Reddick and what they could get for Sweat. Yeah. I think they found out they weren't going to be able to get anything for Josh Sweat. But, I was listening to the beginning of the show, like they could use a weapon on the edge. Boy, what if they could call up the Jets and get a guy like Hassan Reddick on this roster, right?
Dude,
like,
I mean, come on.
It's brutal.
It's a killer.
And to me...
it's why, when fan bases grumble, because you go, well, you guys right here.
Yeah.
And I'm close to Hassan, so I got to tell you, I love him. People say, well, he's trying to get his numbers and all.
He's such a fun player to watch.
He
too.
is.
You can't keep your eyes off him.
Give me a break.
On the edge.
Reddick was a legit disruptor, and it's amazing. When he starts his career, everybody had him playing in the wrong spot. Oh my God! Don't get me started.
It's annoying, but I do think that the big picture here, and you talked about it. I think the reason that they think they could be a little bit lighter on the edge is because they're counting on Jalen Carter to be the guy.
Yeah.
And if Jalen Carter can take the attention of opposing offensive lines... and
you get singled out, man.
Right. If they're going to focus on doubling Jalen Carter, right, all of a sudden you've got one-on-ones for Bryce Huff, and maybe Nolan Smith can take advantage, and maybe they draft a guy in the middle rounds who can be part of that rotation.
What are you hearing about Nolan Smith? Like, seriously, I know you talked about, but, can he... He's got such great quickness, and he's light, but... What about developing those moves? Like, have you talked to anybody?
Good question.
There?
I mean, I know that they feel positive about him in the building. They like the guy, they like the character, and they think that he has, as Howie would say, the tools in his body, right?
Yeah.
But I'm always a little bit skeptical of guys on the edge who have not produced in college. And there are all these excuses for why this isn't the case at Georgia because they rotate and it's not really what they're asked to do. And it was the same thing with Jordan Davis, but. I mean, if you are the best athlete at that position that we've seen come out, and you played 4 years at Georgia, and you never had more than 3 sacks, I don't know. Am I really going to expect you against a higher level of competition to totally turn it on? I'm a little bit skeptical.
Yeah. Hey, the first time we kind of were able to talk about this,
sure.
But do you see a change coming out of Sirianni when it comes to? How hard you practice, how much you do. Like, because I do know inside they feel like they just didn't not work hard enough, but they weren't pushed hard enough. And they felt toward the end of that season, they wilted and they got weak. And I can see a sea change in Sirianni's, kind of mindset for this season and how hard you push them early and really throughout.
It's going to be really interesting to follow. Because, the calculation you're always making, right, is the most important thing we can do is keep the guys healthy. And so if that means practicing light during training camp and it means we're going to be a little bit less prepared week 1 and 2, you probably take that trade-off, right? And, they didn't play well at the end of the season, but they were pretty healthy, and they were really healthy the year before for the Super Bowl.
So let me ask you a question. Where does that – it's fascinating, right? Because – look, they got off to a great start. They're 10-1.
Yeah.
Whole thing. But they wilted.
Yeah.
So where does that come into play? Because it's not about training camp as much as it's training camp and through the season.
I think that's part of it. And I think this also comes down to like the power dynamics in the building, right? Like Nick Sirianni, when he came in, was not the guy who was like the most powerful person in the building, right? He's willing to do what Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie think he care a lot about sports science, right? So they're going to tell him, this is what the data says. We want you to follow this. And he's going to follow it. Now he's in a situation where he's coaching for his job, basically, right? And this is a guy who is a football guy through and through. I would not be surprised if he wants to lean a little bit more into practicing more and being a little bit harder on the guys. There's also the Vic Fangio aspect of this. Like, Vic Fangio is not a guy who probably doesn't want to practice. This is, he's like the caricature of this curmudgeon,
the football coach,
this football guy. So,
which I love those guys. Like,
sure, of course,
they're my favorite. I love those.
And we've already seen some changes. They're going to be doing more in the spring than they did last year. Last year they were coming off the Super Bowl, so there's more reason to give guys time off. But we're seeing a little bit of a change there. I don't know what it's going to look like down the stretch of the season, but I do know that, having been around the game for over a decade, like if a guy feels like his back is against the wall, he's going to do something different. And so Nick Sirianni, the book is that he is a player's coach. He's really hard on his coaches, but not as hard on the players. Maybe that changes a little bit if things are
I could just say, because I know that that's something that's being talked about inside the building about how they finished and kind of how they really.
They're all looking for explanations.
Like, I mean, they felt like they were weak toward the end of the year, and they just kind of crumbled, and that needs to and of course and Jalen obviously needs to have a little kind of almost a redirect back to where he was.
And I think one of the things to follow is that relationship, the Sirianni-Hurts relationship. It's always hard, like how much do you read into what guys say, what they don't say, and like when Jalen doesn't pound the table for support of Nick Sirianni at the end of the season, people are like, is he sending a message? Like, is that a big deal? I think it's probably just Jalen being Jalen, but Sirianni coaches hard, and if Jalen Hurts doesn't think that Nick Sirianni is getting him better and putting him in a position to get better, I don't know if that relationship is great.
Thinking about Jalen for 1 second, people say he was different last year. Did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't around as much during the season, so it's hard for me to say. But I have heard that like there was a bit of a different air about him as like the guy who had gotten paid and is doing like these commercials and all these things. I don't really think that I don't think that's an explanation for why anything went wrong. And it's maybe just like a couple people who think that, but it is something that has been.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and the one thing that it was true, and Brody and I break that tape down, 7 ways from Sunday every week, and he was leaving the pocket early, way too early,
but also not running.
I know, but he would see instead of sliding up or finding some space. And he was just leaving early when he didn't have to.
I know when I close my eyes and think of the 2023 Eagles, the play that is like seared in my mind is over and over again. Jalen Hurts leaving the pocket, scrambling to his right, looking down the field, and
nobody's there,
and throwing the ball away.
Yeah,
like that. What did that happen? 40 times this year,
and it was always going around the right, and there was no nothing for him to go,
and he also wouldn't take off.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
and that was such a weapon. If you look back 2 years ago during the Super Bowl run, I mean, it's always been the back break. It's 3rd and 8, and the quarterback runs for 14, and the defense, had another 3 downs.
And it makes things
and
easier
that's
for
what
the
he
running
did.
back. Because you're taking attention away from the defense. That's the thought process behind why you pay Saquon Barkley is because if opponents are going to be focused on Jalen as a runner and A.J. Brown and Devontae on the outside,
baby.
All of a sudden Saquon Barkley is going to have all the space and like who's more athletic in the open field than him. That's what you pay for. But if Jalen is just a pocket quarterback now, which I don't think is the case, the calculation changes.
I'm with you, Bo. Great stuff, my brother. Great to hang with you, dude.
Thanks for having me.
I love it. There he is, Bo Wulf. Make sure you follow PHLY Eagles and see all the great work that Bo and Zach Berman do together. Thanks, buddy.
Of course. Talking edge rushers today. I'm working on my pronunciation. Leatu.
Nice.
Close
love
enough.
it. Edge. I'll be watching.